So this is Intro to Kinesiology, KIN 200, looking at sociology and sport. And what we're looking at is the influence or the effect that sports, both professional and collegiate, have in the United States and on the society and us as individuals. So sports are sort of huge in the United States. And when you look at the professional and collegiate aspect, when you look at when I'm in class here, I usually ask people, I say, how many people follow high school sports? And you get a couple people. You guys are usually fresh out of college, fresh out of high school, and there's a couple people that raise their hands. But for the most part, unless you're going back to homecoming, you're not really going to games so much unless you have like a niece or a nephew or brother or sister or a child that's playing. You're going to go back and watch. But for the most part, we don't follow high school sports. You're definitely not following a high school in another state. If you were from another state, and you might know your district and your conference, but for the most part, you're not following it. Now, college is a different story. It's a pretty well organized aspect. I would say that some college teams are more popular than some of the professional teams, particularly when you look at like basketball. March Madness is significant. It generates more ad revenue than the basketball championship. The reason why I start this is that when you go to any other country but the United States, college sports, how they view college sports is kind of how we view high school sports here in the United States. It's just not that big of a deal. You get a small amount of people that are interested in it, but for the most part, the vast majority can care less. It's just not that big of a thing. The big sports are the professional, even the semi-pro, the amateur leagues that are related to those. But for the most part, college sports not. But that's different here in the United States. The American football, so football, NFL football, is the most popular sport in the United States, only in the United States. And the Super Bowl is the largest viewed sporting event, bigger than the Olympics, bigger. You get almost a third, maybe more of a third of the U.S. population. Super Bowl Sunday, in February, the Monday afterwards, is one of the largest missed days at work outside of any other holiday, because it's not a holiday here in the United States. But it generates quite a bit. I provided a link here for Wikipedia, and you look at these different bowls. These are college teams, and just for showing up, presenting at the thing, the school is generating $2 to $3 million, right? Each team gets $2 to $3 million for coming to that bowl game, so that's $6 million just being paid out to the team. That shows how much money is being generated by college sports at champion level football. There's more. So you look at, I picked the 6 largest stadiums, 6 largest stadiums capacity-wise in the United States. University of Michigan has a seating capacity of 110,000 people, right? So that's about the size of Schaumburg, right? That's how many people can fit in here. $25 per student, most. Hopefully, I think about a third of our students. $68 pass. In 2016, their revenue was $163 million. Right, that's how much money they brought in. Penn State, $110 per ticket. They can fit about 110,000. $132 million in revenue. Remember, they have their regular scheduled games. Half of those are at home. The other half are there. So this is with 50% of their games for the season. Ohio State, $170 million. Texas A&M football is insane down in Texas. I bet you, maybe I lied. I bet you down in Texas, people follow high school football because they're just football fanatics down there. But almost $200 million in just 50% of their games, right? So there's a huge amount of money. Now, remember, they don't have player salaries they have to pay for. So in most NFL, most professional sports team, the contracts are set up where 50% of the revenues, the net revenues go towards the players, right? And then the other 50% goes towards management and everything else. But in those expenses, you have like the cost of the stadium, you have maintenance, you have the ticket sales booths. So you have quite a bit of expenses that go around with that. But unlike professional teams, none of that money needs to go to the players, right? Most of the coaches get paid pretty well. They'll make anywhere between, these coaches here are making anywhere between $1 to $2 million a year. So there's a pretty high salary with that. And you have a few assistants and the whole support staff. But you definitely don't have the payroll costs that would come from a $20 million signing contract, right? It's just not there. So it's quite a bit of money that's coming in. And it's a good thing because football is popular, and badminton is not. But a badminton program, it's not that it's not. It's just not as popular as football. But a badminton program might not be able to financially sustain itself, but it can because it's subsidized by football, right? So that's where the kind of give or takes at. And there's quite a bit of controversy in terms of should athletes be paid, should they not be paid, how does that affect? And that's a kind of an essay paper that you might have to write at some point in a sociology class, but it's an interesting perspective. But I just wanted to share how much money is being generated, and it's good, right? This is all, it's not like it's being taxed, right? It's not like taxes are being paid for this. These are people that are willingly paying this money to be entertained by these sporting events, and this happens every year. It happens, well, maybe not this, it depends on if there's a pandemic or not, but it happens every year, both college and in the professional aspect. Basketball is also a big sport, but I just wanted to point out how much more NCAA March Madness generates in ad revenue. So $1.2 billion. So about $300 million more than the NBA playoffs and finals. So this is a big thing. How many people aren't basketball fans that still kind of go to parties and get in squares? Not as involved as the Super Bowl, but still pretty involved. So in the United States, the big four sports in order: football through the NFL National Football League, baseball through Major League Baseball, basketball through the National Basketball Association, and hockey, number 4. And I'm sure a lot of you are thinking right now, where the heck is soccer? And it is number 5. It actually is kind of competing right now between soccer and hockey. It depends on, in terms of ad revenue, soccer might be a little more. In terms of participation, soccer might be more. But right now in the United States, these are the big 4, but soccer is up and coming. So is tennis, golf, and wrestling. And then motorsports is also on there. And I'll show you the next slide here in terms of the sports fans. So in the United States, 35% of the from our NFL fans of the United States, 14% Major League Baseball. The third largest viewed sport or fan sport is college football. And then right behind that, auto racing, then basketball, then hockey, then college basketball, and then soccer. So soccer is just I guess it's not televised as much. There's not as much viewership. Now, we're not talking about participation. We're talking about fans, right? We're talking about observation. So people that are viewing these sports. This is where it kind of shows soccer a little differently now. When you look at participation, you can see that, like we'll just jump right here. You can see the different columns here in the 5 different sports. But you can see that in the United States, there's 3.1 million participants for hockey. It does have a larger viewership, so there's more fans. But you can see how many more participants there are. There's actually more people playing soccer than there are playing football. And I think when you look at hockey and football, when you look at the rating here, it really comes down to is what kind of equipment that you need. For ice hockey, not only do you need equipment and skates, but you also need ice to skate on. For football, you need a squad, 11 people, right? And you need your equipment. And it's not as, but you could pick up basketball, baseball, and soccer. The ease of play of these sports, particularly here, all you need is a ball and you can make your own basket. Here you need a field and bat, and a soccer I think is the easiest to play because all you need is a ball, right? And you can play 3-on-3, 5-on-4. You could do different aspects. But basketball, I think it's more conducive to that. But you can see that football just dominates the TV viewership. It's huge. It's insane. Baseball, softball there. You can see the participants in there, and you can see the states that have teams. And I was surprised to find that only there's 2 states that don't have a baseball, softball. I'm not surprised at this in terms of high school that only a quarter or so of the states have hockey, but that's because of ice availability, rink availability. So these are the in order of the viewed sports. So pro football, baseball, and you can kind of see the changes that have happened. And I'm sure if we redid this, you'll see changes even more once this poll comes out. They don't do it every year, but about every 15 years or so. So there should be one due for this. What's interesting is that women's tennis is in the top 12 here. Track and field, the Olympics. Boxing, which is quickly being supplanted by mixed martial arts, both men and women. Now, when we look at this is in the United States. Now, if we look at the popular sports per world, you see a totally different story. So soccer is by far the number one sport on the globe. 4 billion, so half the population of the planet, either follows or plays soccer. Cricket is the number two sport. Never played cricket. I've seen cricket only on movies. It's because it's played in India, and it's the second largest country on the planet. Field hockey, which is very popular through Europe and Africa, 2 billion. Tennis is a global sport, about 1 billion. Volleyball, which I find very entertaining, almost 1 billion individuals just through Europe and North America. So it's actually quite interesting that it's not that popular. Well, it is popular, but it's not as globally accepted. Table tennis, so ping pong, huge. Basketball, baseball, rugby, and golf. And what you don't see on here is American football. And you're not, because it's only played in Canada a little bit. There's an attempt at a European league, and it's North American, right? United States only. Okay, so you saw the sizes across the world, and you saw the size of the United States. And the next slide I'm going to show you is the revenues by the leagues, right? So when we were looking at these different leagues here, the NFL, NBA, and so forth, so you kind of see the different organizations here: football, baseball, Premier League soccer, hockey, and you can kind of see the revenues that these are making. And it's just United States football, U.S. football, American football is the most popular in the United States. It doesn't come close to anything across the world. No one in Europe is interested in NFL. No one in Africa. I mean, not when I say no one, I'm saying most people aren't. They're definitely interested in soccer. But when you look at how much money is being generated through revenues, through ticket sales, through ad revenues, it dominates $13 billion. I think if you add up all of the soccer, so the soccer is green, it just starts to. It's about the same of what just the NFL generates. You have baseball that's played in Canada, Japan, and the United States. Soccer worldwide. NBA, Canada, and the United States. Hockey, of course, Canada and the United States, and of course the other European and a lot of these sports are Olympic based, but you can see that soccer is played quite a bit. All these different leagues, small leagues here and there, but just huge popular sport. Just doesn't generate that much revenue because people don't care about sport as much as they do here in the United States. I joke around that people are way more into sports than they are into politics, right? It's interesting with these shutdowns that are happening that sports have basically ceased, and I'm curious of what's happening. A lot of people are growing itchy and tired of watching reruns all the time. Here are the numbers again. You kind of see the leagues here if you want to kind of add it up. And these revenues are coming from ticket sales, broadcast fees, a lot of merchandising, and sponsorships, right? So again, this isn't money being forced away. These are all free market. People want to participate, and they're generating quite a bit of revenue. So it's a lot of money. That's why cities want to invest in stadiums, and there's relationships there. And sometimes there's some controversy because tax dollars are used to generate or used to build these stadiums. But these teams that are bringing in $200-300 million a year, maybe more, are being taxed on that, and then the revenue sales from concessions and parking and all go to the city. So there's big business, big money in these. If there wasn't, you wouldn't be able to pay athletes millions of dollars a year, right? If the fans weren't there, that's where this money comes from. It's from people watching sport. That's how the advertisers, ticket sales, they wouldn't put sports on TV and sell commercials if they didn't think people were watching it. So there's a lot of that. So next thing we're going to look at is diversity in sport. We're going to look at race of participants and the sex of participants. So the next slide here, I want you to determine which of these have the single greatest race or ethnicity. So when I say the NBA and WNBA, 75% of those players are what ethnicity? And the correct answer is black. 65% of NFL is black. 60% of Major League Baseball. Many students want to say Hispanic origin, or Latino, but it is white. 60% of Major League Baseball is white. 90% of NHL is white. Yes, Canadian mostly, right? What's interesting is that the MLS, the Major League Soccer, is the only sport that can claim that it doesn't have more than 50% or dominant of race or ethnicity participating. So 45% white, 25% Latino, 10% black, and 20% other. So it is the most diverse sport compared to the other aspects. And I think I have a couple slides in coming up, but there's always a question of why these racial components of why is this mostly dominated by black, why mostly white here, why is there such a large Hispanic aspect in soccer and baseball, but you don't see that so much in NFL. So it's interesting of why these dynamics are. I think I have that slide, so we'll hold on that question there. There's another slide kind of showing the distribution here between the racial breakdown. You can see that there's quite a bit of significance in the Asian, and that's because of the Major League Baseball in Japan. You can see with NFL and Major League Baseball. So here is NFL, 65% black, 34% white, and small percentage Latino Hispanic. And I'm seeing my next slide here, and it's talking about sex differences. So I don't have the race differences in sports here, but let me go back up to a couple slides here just to kind of point it out that when we look at the availability of the sports is that one of the aspects is where we have the largest concentration of these players, participants. So we look at basketball, and basketball is very much a city sport. And the reason why it's a city sport is that you don't need a field, you need a court, right? Blacktop, and you don't really need even an official court. You just need half a court. You may or may not have a basket. You can form your own basket, and really all you need is a ball. And that's what makes soccer such an appealing sport, is that the cost of entry is so low. Basketball, the cost of entry is so low. Football, it is subsidized. It's a popular sport, so it is supported by the academic system, so high school and so forth. But there's an equipment cost to it. So is hockey, but hockey is usually associated with more stronger social economic aspect, because you need private time, private ice, equipment that's involved, and it's usually not subsidized by states. We saw that only 15 states had hockey programs, and I'm sure they're northern Midwestern states, so like Minnesota and Montana and those type of components right on the Canadian border. I'm just kind of pulling that one out. I didn't do research on that, but so there's accessibility. The other thing is that historical continuity. So you typically look up at role models that you grow up with, or your peer groups, right? It all comes back down to the socialization. What were you exposed to early on? And it just kind of breeds itself in that aspect. So it's interesting why there's the discrepancies, and it doesn't mean that black people are better basketball players or they're not good hockey players. It just, that's what they grew up with. That was their social aspect. That was their peer group. That was their family. That was their role models. So the next thing we look at is the sex differences in sports. And as I said earlier, with the boys are engaged to participate more in physical activity, and there is a physicality that exists in more men than women because of that testosterone. Some sports like the lacrosse, there's a difference in the way the sport is played. Other sports like track and field events or golf, there's different expectations where men start versus women start. And in other sports, there may or may not be options. So like in wrestling, wrestling is becoming more popular with women. About a decade ago, the women participated at the men's level and they did their aspect. You look at gymnastics, you look at you don't really see a lot of women. You don't see women doing rings, not that they couldn't, but it's an upper body strength sport, right? Which, not that women wouldn't be able to do it, but you're going to see more out of the male athlete in that aspect. Now, one sport that is somewhat interesting is basketball, because there is no difference between men's basketball and women's basketball. So you have the NBA versus the WNBA. And as I had said earlier, that most professional teams, 50% of revenue is paid out to NBA salaries. But in the WNBA, only 25% of the revenue is paid out. And, there is this political aspect of the wage gap that exists. And in the wage gap, when you just look at averages, like we look at the average salary of men versus women, and you don't look specifically at what task or what work they were doing, just look at the wage gap exists, but it doesn't exist because you're not really comparing apples to apples. You're comparing more apples to oranges, right? But when you look at like a male hired for a job and a woman hired for a job, and you have the exact same experience, and you look at everything down, that wage gap quickly disappears, right? That almost non-existence. But when you look at just the general population of men and the general population of women, men tend to, just like when we talked about in a previous lecture, that the death rate of men is usually higher because they take on riskier behavior, right? You don't find a lot of women operating cranes or heavy machinery or doing underwater welding that pays out at $150 to $160 per hour, right? You don't see that in that aspect. You also don't see men taking time off to raise families, not because they're forced to, because they choose to, returning. So you have that interrupted aspect. This situation, however, is comparing apples to apples. This is a straight up men getting paid more than women. Now, the NBA definitely generates much more viewership and much more money, but this is looking at relative, not absolute. So it's looking at 50% of the revenues. So it doesn't matter if it's 50% of 1 million or 50% of 1,000, it's still 50%. When you look at the WNBA, 25%. So when you look at the MVP for 2016, his salary was $11.4 million, 50% of that. 2016, that $95,000, which is not bad money, but you're not retiring and going nuts and throwing parties, right? Even if it was 50%, she'd be at $200,000, and that's just reflecting how little revenue is generated by the women's basketball league, the WNBA. It shows how unpopular it is compared, right? So you have men's basketball, women's basketball, and there's really no difference in terms of the way the sport's played, but yet the NBA tends to generate more viewership. Yeah, they've been around longer. There's more aspect there, but there's something that's going on, whether it's competitiveness or the intensity of the plays, which has been surveyed and been answered to. One of the things that was interesting is that women's tennis is significantly more popular than men's tennis from a viewership perspective. And some argue, and I kind of follow along with this, is that when you look at the NBA versus that WNBA, is that there's really no difference in the sport. There's no difference in the uniforms. When you look at the women's tennis, you have Serena Williams here, and she was a significantly better player, but compared to Anna Kournikova, she was not as good as a player, but she looked better. She was slender. She was considered more attractive, and got more demand in that aspect, and really kind of pushed women's tennis at the time. And remember, I said that majority of men view sports, watch sports, and that majority is heterosexual, and that majority is driven by sex and by visual aspect. And there's arguments that the reason why WNBA is not as popular is that it's not as intense, it's just not as visual appealing to the viewership, the fanship, right? Whereas tennis, in this case, more attractive in that aspect, right? In terms of uniforms and so forth. And my only other argument, or at least thing to share with this, is that there was varying levels of football in different leagues there, and there is a women's football league, and it's growing pretty rapidly. Actually, it's kind of evolving. I think it's competing in terms of surpassing viewerships for the WNBA, and they don't come out and hide it. It's this women's football league, which was like the Powder Puff, and now it's the Lingerie Football League. And the uniforms are clearly different, but the contact is not. It's not a powder puff flag football. This is full contact football, and this is a growing sport. So it's sad. It kind of plays along with like the human physiology, but there's a reason probably why this is a popular sport. Football is going to take good hits, but I have some videos here. So you can look at there's more videos that you can look online for this, but in the end, I think the argument is that it comes back to the body image aspect that sex sells, and you have a dominant viewership that is participating in the sports and participation and in the fan viewership of the sports, and when you look at what sells, what doesn't, that's going to sell. And so when you look at these sports, and so what's driving it, is it the athletic ability always? It may not be, right? Is it from the participation? Is it from there's different reasons why people watch different sports, but there's this little mini, or this module is meant to really show you all the different avenues you can go into with the sociology of sport, and how you can take a topic like sociology and apply it and really try to find out what drives human behavior, what drives social acceptance, what drives the positives and minuses, where should we put our time into, and where do we come up with solutions if solutions are even needed. But you can see that and we haven't even scratched the surface on like ethics, but when you look at like college versus professional sports, athletes being paid, you look at like transgendered athletes with female athletes and male athlete, you look at the fans and viewership, participation, subsidization of other sports, Title IX acts, there's quite a bit of social aspects that are coming into play here that are all related to kinesiology. So again, it was meant to be an introduction, meant to be kind of a stimulate for thought. And there'll be some questions on discussion board posted on kind of what you feel, either agree, disagree, or maybe have your own opinion on some of these things. So that's it for Module 8.